Hello again, groups at St Matthias. It's Toby here, missing you all very much. We're continuing our series Honest to God, looking at the Psalms, and this week I really wanted to focus in on a little bit more of the basic kind of theology and understanding of the literary side of the Psalms. So today we're going to look at the four main types of Psalms. And again, just a kind of reminder of why the Psalms are important to us. Not only are they're the longest book in the Bible, so they make up the biggest chunk of this, but they have been and they continue to be hugely important for the worshipping life of the church. So in the Anglican tradition, of which we're a part, all 150 Psalms are prayed through once a month in the Book of Common Prayer, which I obviously use this all the time. Benedictine monks, they go even one step further. They pray every single one of the Psalms every week. So that's 21 Psalms a day for 365 days. The Psalms are important and influential because they teach us how to worship and how to pray. We're made to worship and to glorify God. That is the very goal of our existence. And prayer is fundamental to our relationship with God. And the Psalms show us how to pray and how to worship, not by giving us a list of commands or to-dos or, I think we struggle to follow 10 commandments, let alone 150 of them. But no, the Psalms show us how to pray and how to worship by demonstrating what communication with God looks like. They show us how to talk and converse with God. And like I said, there are four main types of Psalms. There are others as well. But the four main ones are praise, lament, thanksgiving, and royal Psalms. The others are wisdom Psalms, songs of ascent. But these are the four main Psalms that it's kind of helpful to recognize. And let's look at praise. So these are Psalms like 33, Psalm 100, Psalm 113, 117, and 145 to 147. I'm just going to turn to Psalm 113, which goes like this. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord, you his servants. Praise the name of the Lord. Let the name of the Lord be praised, both now and forevermore. From the rising of the sun to the place where it sets, the name of the Lord is to be praised. The Lord is exalted over all the nations, his glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God, the one who sits enthroned on high, who stoops down to look on the heavens and the earth? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with the princes of his people. He settles the childless woman in her home as a happy mother of children. Praise the Lord. Now, the Psalms of praise usually have this set pattern. It starts with a call to praise. This is very clear in this Psalm, verse 1. Praise the Lord. And then it goes into some of the reason for praise. So that's the greatness of God, the character of God, who God is, the grace of God, and what God does for us. And it gives specific examples. So in this one, it's the Lord is exalted above all the nations. He raises the poor from the dust. He seats them with princes. He settles the childless woman in her home as a happy mother of children. And then the Psalms of praise typically end with another call to praise. So again, this is really clear in this one in verse 9. It starts with praise the Lord, verse 1, verse 9, praise the Lord. They're framed with praise. And the really important thing to remember with the Psalms of praise, and the wonderful thing they do, is that they recenter us. The problem with humanity is that we make ourselves the center of the universe. Everything revolves around us. And the Psalms of praise remind us who God is and who we are in relation to God. And they remind us that we are not the center of the universe, but God is the one who brings all things into life, who gives everything being, who sustains all things. So the Psalms of praise reorder and reorient our lives. The second kind of psalm is lament. And we've touched a lot on this in our sermon series on Sundays and in groups as well. And the reason for that, partly, is just because there are so many psalms of lament. There are individual psalms, so that's 6, 10, 22, 26, 31, 38 to 40, 42 to 43, 54 to 59, 60, 70 to 71, 86, 88, 109, 120, 141, 142. There's a lot of them. There are also communal psalms of lament, so groups of people who'd be praying these psalms. That's 44, 58, 60, 74, 79, 80, 83, and 85. So just notice the sheer volume of psalms of lament or complaint. Now, lamenting doesn't necessarily just mean grieving. It means protesting. It means bringing your complaints before God. Justin Welby at the moment is doing a series on prayer. If you can go on his website, he's got 4 or 5 different videos just exploring prayer, and one of them is learning to lament. And he talks about it of lament being like protesting before God. When you read a psalm like Psalm 88, for example, I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. You have taken from me my closest friends, and have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. And it goes on like that. But these psalms give us permission to recognize that things are not right in the world, and things are not right with our relationship with God. And they give us permission to recognize that the world isn't as it should be. They give us permission to feel and think all kinds of things in the context of our relationship with God. And you can also read some of these psalms in a messianic light. So if you read Psalm 88 again at some point after this or in the week, read it and think of Jesus praying these things in the Garden of Gethsemane. You have taken from me my closest friends that have made me repulsive to them. You can imagine Jesus thinking this and praying this as the disciples are fast asleep behind him, just as his hour of need. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. So there's a really powerful way of engaging with the Psalms of Lament. And there are some psalms which start with lament and then long for revenge. That's Psalm 137, for example, one that gets touched on a lot in this is quite a difficult psalm. It starts with, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. A very familiar bit, but then it ends with, happy are those who dash the infants' heads against the rock. How are we to process this? How are we to understand this? And I know that Mark gave, a couple of weeks ago, Mark Scalata gave us really helpful tools and ways of understanding these kind of points of revenge, to think about them in the context of the evils that befall us in this life and in this world, the great sins of the world that we long to be rid of, that we long to kill off. But this also, when you put it in context, this is what the Israelites experienced at the hands of the Babylonians. They're flipping it back on their oppressors. They want them to know what it is like. This doesn't make this action right. The Psalms don't condone this action. But it allows even this desire, even the murderous desires that dwell in the darkest parts of our being, to be brought into our relationship with God. And I think it's better, always better, to bring these things before God than to let them sit or dwell or fester below the surface where they begin to eat us up. So that's Psalms of Lament. The third is Psalms of Thanksgiving. These are Psalms like Psalm 18, Psalm 30, 32, 34, 41, 65, 66, 67, 75, 107, 116, 118, 121, 124, 136, and 138. And let's look at Psalm 116. Verses 1 to 7 go like this. I love the Lord, for he heard my voice. He heard my cry for mercy. Because he turned his ear to me, I will call on him as long as I live. The cords of death entangled me. The anguish of the grave came over me. I was overcome by distress and sorrow. Then I called on the name of the Lord. Lord, save me. The Lord is gracious and righteous. Our God is full of compassion. The Lord protects the unwary. When I was brought low, he saved me. These psalms often, again, have a kind of set pattern. They talk about past distress, then crying out to God for deliverance, and then God's salvation. Walter Brueggemann, who has been mentioned a few times, has written a lot on the Old Testament and the Psalms in particular. He's a scholar and theologian. He talks about the Psalms as taking us on a journey of orientation, praise, who's the object of this psalm, who's it directed to, and then to disorientation. There's an element of lament here. What is going on? And then to reorientation, thanksgiving and thanks for God's faithfulness. Orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. That's the kind of trajectory of the Psalms of Thanksgiving. And then finally, the royal Psalms. This is Psalms like Psalm 2, Psalm 18, 45, 72, 89, 101, 110, and 144, to name a few. Let's take a look at Psalm 45. And these specifically talk about the king and his role in the life of Israel. So it has a very particular meaning. Psalm 45 starts like this. My heart is stirred by a noble theme as I recite my verses for the king. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. You are the most excellent of men, and your lips have been anointed with grace, since God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your side, you mighty one. Clothe yourself with splendor and majesty. In your majesty ride forth victoriously in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. Let your right hand achieve awesome deeds. And it goes on like that. And this looks like it goes into a kind of royal wedding psalm, speaking first to the king and then to the queen. It goes on. Listen, daughter, and pay careful attention. Forget your people and your father's house. Let the king be enthralled by your beauty. Honor him, for he is your Lord. These take on a new meaning for us as Christians, because the king, the only king for us, is Jesus. So the wedding psalms are kind of about Jesus and his marriage to his bride, the church. When you read about the king, it's helpful to think about Jesus. That's a very brief overview of the four main types of psalms. But the last thing I wanted to touch on, and a very helpful tool for understanding the psalms, is to think about honesty and truth and the difference between them, the reality of God and the reality of our lives, essentially. Because the Psalms are where the reality of God connects with the reality of our lives. The whole range of human emotion is on display within the Psalms. You have delight, hatred, gratitude, anger, fear, disappointment, the desire for revenge, contentment, feeling close to God, and feeling like God is absent, among many others. All this means that there are no emotions which are off limits in our relationship with God. There is no emotion that cannot be directed towards God or included in our relationship with God. Even the emotions that we don't like can be turned into prayer. I think thinking about these in the context of music, a lot of them would have been set to music. And pop music often teaches us how to feel. Which is why it's really important and kind of informative in our teenage years to listen to pop music. And the Psalms do a similar thing, but they teach us how to feel with God and towards God. We can sometimes feel ashamed of what we feel, but the Psalms enable us to articulate them towards God. The Psalms aren't just an expression of our emotions towards or with God. They're also attempts to reach out, to grasp the reality of God. And like I was saying, there's a difference between honesty and truth. Honesty is saying what we feel, but that might not necessarily be a literal truth. I feel abandoned by my friends when you haven't been abandoned at all. I feel helpless when actually you can be helped. I feel like there's no point continuing with this project when there actually is. Truth is saying what is objectively actually real. God is with us even when we don't feel it. That's truth. We are valuable in the eyes of God. That's truth. And we need both honesty and truth. We need to be able to say how we feel, even if it doesn't match reality. We also need to grasp reality. All honesty without truth is being ruled and defined by our emotions. All truth and no honesty suppresses our emotions. The Psalms help us to relate to God with both honesty and truth. One exercise you might want to do now in your groups as you return for discussion is to read through Psalm 22 together. And I wouldn't go for the whole thing, it's quite long, but maybe just read up to Psalm verse 24 or something. Read through that psalm together and try and highlight the points which are honesty and which are truth. It's a really helpful exercise to do. I hope this has been helpful for you and informative in some way and helps you to engage with the wonderful book of the Psalms. And I'll be praying for all of you, as I have been praying for groups at St. Matthias this whole term, that the Psalms enliven you and enrich your relationship with God. So have a great day. Have a lovely evening with your groups, or afternoon with your groups, and I will see you soon.